It begins with a promise. A world without ownership, they said, would be a world without worry. No more debt, no more clutter, no more burden of things. You'll stream your music, rent your home, lease your car, subscribe to your food, and somehow you'll feel free. That's the dream sold by corporations, governments, and futurists. A digital utopia where everything is available and nothing is yours. But behind that promise lies a quiet revolution, one that didn't need protests or wars, only algorithms and contracts. Because the less you own, the more dependent you become. Ownership once meant control over land, tools, and destiny. Today, it means little more than terms of service and renewable subscriptions. This isn't an accident. It's the logical conclusion of a century-long shift in how power, money, and value are distributed. A shift from property to access, from independence to managed consumption. So when they tell you that you'll own nothing and be happy, remember this. Empires no longer need to take your land to control you. They only need to make you believe you never wanted to own it in the first place. Once, ownership was the foundation of freedom. To own something, land, a home, a tool, meant autonomy. It meant you could create, produce, and live without permission. From the peasant who tilled his own soil to the craftsman who owned his tools, ownership was a form of power. It was the difference between dependence and independence, between survival and dignity. But the industrial age began to change that equation. The rise of mass production made goods cheaper, but also centralized the systems that created them. To have a car, a home, or even electricity now meant relying on corporations, supply chains, and banks. The idea of ownership began to stretch beyond what you could hold in your hands. It became something you financed. You didn't own your home, the bank did. You didn't own your car, the lender did. The illusion of ownership was sustained only by the promise of future payments. Then came the digital revolution, and everything shifted again. Suddenly, owning became obsolete. Music, movies, software, everything moved to the cloud. You didn't buy albums, you streamed them. You didn't own DVDs, you subscribed. The logic was simple: convenience over control. But beneath that convenience was something profound: the slow erasure of private ownership from daily life. In this new world, what once was a one-time purchase became a perpetual rent. Your digital tools were no longer possessions, but services. The word lifetime vanished from product guarantees, replaced by monthly plan. Even books, the timeless symbol of individual knowledge, moved into platforms that could delete your collection with a click. Every update was another reminder that what you had could be revoked, revised, or restricted. For corporations, it was perfect. Ownership meant limits. Renting meant endless revenue. The streaming model turned products into recurring income streams and users into permanent customers. For governments, it meant control. The fewer assets you owned, the less independent you became. A digital society where property is centralized and access is conditional is far easier to manage than one filled with self-sufficient owners. And yet, people accepted it. The trade-off seemed harmless. Why deal with storage, maintenance, or debt when you could just access anything instantly? Why own when you could subscribe to freedom? But beneath that promise lay a quiet truth. When everything is rented, freedom itself becomes a service. When ownership died for the many, it didn't disappear, it consolidated. The 21st century didn't destroy property, it concentrated it. While the average person traded their possessions for access, a new elite quietly bought the systems of access themselves. This was the rebirth of an ancient idea, the rentier class, those who own not the products but the platforms. In feudal times, peasants worked land owned by lords. In the digital age, users generate data owned by corporations. The pattern is identical. The labor, the effort, and the time of the many enrich the few who own the infrastructure. Every app, every streaming service, every smart product is a digital estate, rented out to billions who will never hold its title deed. By 2030, the world's largest corporations no longer manufacture things, they rent experiences. BlackRock doesn't just invest in homes, it buys entire neighborhoods. Apple doesn't just sell phones, it locks you into an ecosystem. Amazon doesn't just deliver goods, it defines the logistics of consumption itself. Each transaction, each subscription, each click feeds the same machine, a world where access is infinite, but ownership is scarce. This isn't capitalism as it was once understood. In the classical sense, capitalism thrived on ownership, individuals risking capital to create and sell goods. But platform capitalism reversed that model. Now, individuals risk their privacy, their labor, and their time to enrich those who already own the networks. The new landlords don't need armies or borders. They have terms of service and algorithmic control. The rentier class makes money not by creating, but by controlling. They don't sell you the car, they rent you the ride. They don't sell you the software, they rent you the update. They don't sell you the home, they manage your lease. It's passive income at planetary scale, where value flows upward endlessly, and ownership pools at the top like oil on water. Even governments have begun to adapt to this structure. Tax codes, financial systems, and digital policies now favor rent-seeking behavior over productive creation. When wealth is derived from control rather than contribution, inequality isn't a flaw, it's the business model. And the rest of society? We call it convenience. But convenience has a cost. Every automated payment, every auto-renewal, every seamless click strips one more layer of independence. In a world where access is everything, disconnection becomes rebellion. Yet rebellion is nearly impossible when the tools of resistance, communication, coordination, even thought, belong to the very platforms you'd oppose. The rentier class doesn't need to take anything from you directly. They simply make it easier for you to give it away. The most powerful revolutions in history rarely begin with force. They begin with belief. The system that made people trade ownership for access wasn't imposed, it was marketed. Its success depended not on coercion, but on desire. And to understand how the world came to celebrate renting as freedom, we must look at how psychology became the new tool of control. The digital economy learned early that happiness could be engineered. Every app, every platform, every product was designed not to satisfy, but to keep you coming back. Subscription models didn't just change how we paid, they changed how we thought. When access replaced ownership, satisfaction became temporary by design. The new economy wasn't about having enough, it was about wanting more, endlessly. Access became the language of liberation. Streaming services promised infinite entertainment. Ride-hailing apps promised instant mobility. Social media promised connection without boundaries. The narrative was intoxicating. Freedom without responsibility, abundance without accumulation. It was a story so well told that people didn't notice what was missing: permanence. Ownership once gave people a sense of control and identity. A home represented stability. A book on a shelf represented memory. But digital access made everything fluid, erasable, replaceable, upgradable. It taught us that permanence was a burden, that identity could be stored in the cloud, and that possessions tied us down. Convenience became the new morality. This shift wasn't organic. It was engineered through behavioral economics, user interface design, and data-driven marketing. Platforms used what psychologists call variable reward systems, the same principles that keep gamblers hooked. Every scroll, every click, every notification trained users to associate pleasure with consumption and anxiety with absence. In this psychological economy, dependence wasn't a side effect, it was the goal. Soon, owning felt outdated, even selfish. Why buy when you can share? Why save when you can subscribe? The moral language of the 21st century turned scarcity into virtue and dependence into community. People began to feel guilty for wanting permanence, as if permanence itself were an outdated privilege. The new ideology wasn't about wealth or poverty, it was about belonging to the system. And so access became happiness, but conditional happiness. You could be free as long as you stayed connected. You could enjoy everything as long as you kept paying. The subscription economy turned joy into a meter, a constant reminder that everything you experience has an expiration date. What began as convenience became conditioning. The system didn't need to take your freedom, it simply needed to convince you that you'd outgrown it. Every era of history has its ruling structure. The medieval world had kings and lords. The industrial age had magnates and bankers. The digital age, too, has its rulers, but they don't wear crowns or command armies. They rule through servers, code, and contracts. We live in what can only be described as a digital feudal age. In this new order, data is land. Platforms are kingdoms. Tenants are users. The lines of ownership are clear but inverted. You may think your account is yours, but your access is granted, not guaranteed. The apps on your phone, the content you create, even the ideas you express exist only at the mercy of platforms that can erase them in seconds. In medieval times, the lord could expel a peasant from the land. Today, a platform can delete your livelihood with a policy update. Like serfs, we till the digital fields, producing content, engagement, and data that enrich the few who own the infrastructure. The harvest isn't crops, but attention and information. The lords of this new era are the data monopolies. Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Tencent. Their empires stretch across borders, their reach extending into nearly every human interaction. They don't just sell products, they shape behavior. The difference between a subject and a citizen is ownership. When people own land, tools, and ideas, they govern themselves. When they merely rent access, they serve the system that provides it. The world has quietly shifted back toward dependence, but this time wrapped in the illusion of choice. The digital lords do not demand allegiance, they offer convenience. They do not conquer nations, they buy data. Even money, once a symbol of autonomy, has become part of this structure. The rise of digital payments, central bank digital currencies, and cashless systems has given governments and corporations unprecedented control over every transaction. In a fully digital economy, ownership of money itself is replaced by permission to use it. The same logic that made you rent your home and lease your software now governs the very medium of exchange. The digital feudal age doesn't rely on violence to maintain order. It relies on dependence, distraction, and dopamine. Its walls are not made of stone, but of networks. Its chains are invisible, woven through subscriptions, debt, and algorithms. And like all empires before it, it thrives on faith, the belief that the system is too convenient, too efficient, too vast to live without. We are told this is progress, but when power is centralized, access is conditional, and ownership is an illusion, progress begins to look a lot like the past, just dressed in better technology. The greatest trick of modern power is not control, it's comfort. Unlike past empires, the new system doesn't demand obedience through fear. It earns it through pleasure. The more connected you are, the more convenient life becomes, and the less you notice how much of it you no longer own. Freedom has been redesigned, rebranded, and resold as a service. In this new reality, you are free to choose, but only among pre-approved options. You can express yourself as long as the algorithm finds it acceptable. You can travel as long as your digital ID validates your access. You can speak, earn, and live as long as your subscriptions remain active. The boundaries of modern liberty are defined not by walls, but by interfaces. The system doesn't forbid rebellion, it absorbs it. Every anti-establishment message can be monetized. Every movement becomes content. Every voice of dissent becomes another data point in the machine. Even outrage is profitable. The illusion of freedom depends on your participation, on the belief that constant engagement equals autonomy. But engagement without control is not freedom, it's captivity, disguised as connection. The promise of own nothing and be happy is not a conspiracy slogan, it's the logical end of a system that values efficiency over independence. It's the culmination of decades of design choices that made us trade permanence for access, control for convenience, and privacy for participation. The world didn't take freedom away, it redefined it until we couldn't tell the difference. And yet, history whispers the same warning it always has. No empire, digital or otherwise, lasts forever. Ownership, once taken, eventually reasserts itself. When systems become too centralized, people begin to rebuild from the edges, creating parallel economies, alternative currencies, and new definitions of value. The desire to own, to control, to create, it never truly dies. It waits, quietly, beneath the surface of dependency. The question is not whether you'll own nothing. The question is whether you'll notice, and whether, when you finally do, it will be too late to reclaim what was once yours. Because freedom isn't in the things you use, it's in the things you can still refuse.